All right, so now we are getting ready for our panel discussion. Let's see if everybody's in here. I believe so.
Hello.
Hello.
I think we're all there.
Hi. They're all there. So the floor is yours. So Melissa, please explain to the audience what is coming up right now.
Great, thank you very much, Steph. So today we have a panel discussion that is titled Parking Talks about COVID-19's effect on municipalities and cities. We have joining us today Graham from York, we have Phil from the London Borough of Barnet, and we have Koen from Brugge. In a moment, I will ask you, gentlemen, to introduce yourselves. So thank you very much for joining us today. We know that things are very busy for you all right now with things opening back up slowly. And so we really do appreciate your time today. The format of the panel today will be that we will have polled statements and questions so the audience can also join in. And after that, we will have an open floor Q&A. So feel free at any moment in time to use the chat function to ask our questions throughout the discussion. Once we get started, I will turn my webcam off as we would like to concentrate solely on you gentlemen, as you are the experts in this field. So yeah, let's get started. Perhaps we can kick off and you can introduce yourselves. Who would like to go first?
I'll go first then, shall I? Picking in the middle. So yeah, Graham Titchener. So I'm head of parking services basically for the City of York Council. I'm also one of the, I think 5 or 6 now elected members for the British Parking Association for local authorities as well. So as well as the local work, I tend to get a lot of the regional, but certainly the national work as well. So it's a pleasure to be here today.
Borough of Barnet. Sorry, I missed something there.
Can I hear you now, Phil? Yep.
Yeah, Phil Hoare from the London Borough of Barnet, which is one of London's largest boroughs up in the northwest of the city. Quite a diverse area. It covers from inside the North Circular Road, which is one of the ring roads of London, where the low emission zones covers it, all the way meeting the metropolitan green belt that surrounds London. So sort of probably have a whole range of urban issues that arise there. Lots of through corridors of transit, and goodness, haven't we seen a change? So looking forward to the rest of the panel and you hear about those changes.
My name is Koen van Vansteenland. I work for the City of Brugge, the mobility department. I've been responsible for the parking policy since 2011, and a lot has changed since the beginning, and especially the last couple of months, we've seen a lot of changes.
Great, thank you very much. So let's kick off with our discussion, and we will now have the first poll. So audience, please feel free to vote on the question that you would like answered. All of the questions are about our panelists' experience so far. So we will give it a few seconds and we will see what the most popular question is. So we have questions such as, what has been the effect of COVID-19 on your municipality? What adaptations have you implemented? What have you learned so far? And any key highlights that you think would be beneficial to others? So let's have a look at the results of the poll so far. Ooh, okay, that's pretty decisive. So we have, what adaptations have you implemented so far? So please, gentlemen, kick off.
So I'm happy to kick off. The first adaptation that we meant was probably around about the 19th of March. And that was when we decided that we were going to withdraw the vast majority of our enforcement operations. That was in part because we were worried about keeping our labour force safe, and in part because we realised that, you know, suddenly you were going to have a lot more people at home. A lot of our focus was around, you know, we've got resident parking areas. You know, people are going to be in them that maybe would normally not be in them. People were going to access permits, but at the same time, our workforce was going to be severely impacted by either not being able to come to offices because they were sick or because they would have to work from home, etc. Or it was no longer viable to continue an enforcement operation, nor really desirable. You know, you need to taste the sort of the flavour of public opinion on these matters. So, you know, we've vastly scaled that down. Normally putting 60 people a day out, we were down to 15, focused very much around shops, pharmacies, hospitals, medical centres, so that people weren't in a dangerous situation there. Changed from, you know, observing a vehicle for a minute to observing it for 10 minutes, you know, to be reasonable, so that people who are just trying to get through their daily lives were supported, but those who were putting others at risk were still going to see a penalty. I saw other parts of London, they withdrew their enforcement entirely. So as far as adaptations go, that's probably the most material. Parking in the UK is a large income generator. Paid parking, as well as the receipt of the charges for enforcement. Those income sources have collapsed, whilst the cost of operating the service has been maintained. So financially, we've already made adaptations around, you know, for budget planning, although there is a bit of a black hole that I imagine most authorities have got. So yeah, I'll hand over to other panelists.
Yeah, I'll just follow on from what Phil was saying there. I think you'll find a reasonable amount of commonality for all the UK authorities, Scotland, Wales, devolved administrations, London and England as well, in all honesty, where, yeah, similarly, we've laid down our enforcement down to an on-call service only. We have something called a parking hotline that people can call, and will basically be communicated that will only deal with issues of severe obstruction or dangerous parking. The back office team, one of my other service areas, they still operate on the permit-based side of things. We've taken away the reduction of debt. The result of that, and very much aligning our services with a council tax service. So when they start up their council tax collections again with enforcement agents, we'll marry that as well. But what I think you'll see an awful lot here in the UK is a lot of commonality around following what the government guidance is. They're on people like Phil and myself, and have to interpret what that means then locally, with our local politicians and the local economy, what the local businesses want, and indeed what the residents want. So we exercise quite an extreme amount of leniency when it comes to enforcement, free extension of parking permits when those are expiring, for example, and then looking at how best then we can take it forward. And that'll be one of the questions in a minute, I would imagine, around recovery, which is what we're heavily involved with at the moment, with a view to kicking that off probably the next couple of weeks back to some kind of normality again. But that gives you a broad indication of what it's like. And as Phil was saying, parking income for the UK local authorities is one of the probably top three going, really. Council tax, business rates and parking income, where we're all losing, you know, hundreds of thousands of pounds a month, if not millions, I guess, in many people's cases as well. So yeah, broadly that's what we've been doing at the moment.
I think in Belgium we more or less did the same thing. From the 18th of March we stopped the enforcement, so we didn't have any enforcement anymore in the city of Bruges. Not in the paying zone and not in the blue disc zone as well. That was because from the 13th and especially from the 20th we went into a total lockdown. And there weren't a lot of people around anymore. There weren't a lot of visitors, no visitors to the city center, but also most people had to work at home, so there weren't a lot of cars anymore. And secondly, we started to notice some aggression against our parking enforcers. People couldn't understand that we still enforced parking policy in conditions like these. There were more, more important issues than parking policy in their mind. So the aggression started to mount, and that was also one of the key factors why the company that works for us, because we don't have our own enforcers, decided to stop enforcing the parking. the parking enforcement restarted already in Belgium or in Bruges. We restarted the 18th of May on last Monday. So we stopped enforcement for about 2 months. And we noticed that without any enforcement, people tend not to oblige, they don't follow the rules, or they don't follow the policies, and that's a big thing we learned in this episode. And financially, it's normally we get around 6,000, 7,000 tickets a month. Got next to none now, and we lost about, I would say, 600,000 to 700,000 euros of income, parking fees.
Yeah, it's interesting to look at the statistics as far as PCNs go. Our enforcement operation obviously was scaled back but not reduced. We probably went from the equivalent of about 350 tickets a day down to single figures on some days. However, we also have the CCTV enforcement operation for bus lanes, moving traffic contraventions like your banned turns, no entries, and found that we were still seeing levels that were probably about a third of what they had been previously with those contraventions. And the lowest point was probably about a week to 10 days after the government announced lockdown. However, and then sort of plateaued towards Easter, and then there's been a sort of rise since then. And I've noticed other traffic models that have seen similar levels of activity. Now, clearly, there was always some activity that had to take place, and there were key workers as well. But it is interesting that there was still, when the parking enforcement went away, there was still that low level of contravention, but quite material level of contravention of moving traffic things. So showing that the highways didn't entirely disappear as a place for people going.
Yeah, very much. I think that's quite a key point there that Phil also makes about key workers. I mean, I think we found something similar with our bus lanes, which we kept going, mainly because it's a safety issue rather than anything else, and obviously trying to keep what little bus services we have going here in New York especially. But the key worker status is something that's been very welcomed, and I think similar to what Koen was saying there about the little bistro CEOs, that is something I think we've seen that certainly nationally here as well, for people just taking their frustrations out on civil enforcement officers or neighbourhood enforcement officers or police even, that we've seen as well. Some horrific accounts in the media about people spitting at them and such like as well. So I think as we go back, we're certainly going to be looking at more of a lighter touch approach around this, but the key worker side of things I think has really helped parking services across the board, in that we've been providing a free parking essentially for key workers, NHS healthcare workers, food service providers, the banking sector and the like. But now we're getting to that point where, actually following government guidance again, we're going to begin to look at scaling those down. So yeah, there's had to be a severe amount of adaptations that we've had to react towards that, as well as obviously parking locations being one of the very few open areas in municipalities that we have in the towns and city centres that we have around testing stations as well. So there's been a number of local authorities that have had to hand over and work with various local resilience forums as part of the NHS work to roll out more testing stations where people come into nice big open areas and be tested essentially. So there's been a number of things that we've also have a look at there. So it really assures, I guess, the broad range of what parking is about, what parking management is about, I think probably more importantly really, and how we've been able to use our estate to the benefit of all.
Yeah, the redeployment of services has been interesting. Our staff have done parks patrols. That was, in fact, quite a big thing, because we have 200 parks in the borough, and we were, helping maintain social distancing, as well as also we've been using them as observers in the vicinity of underground and railway stations, so that we can see whether there's any potential for queues forming in those areas. So sort of that adaptability and working with a workforce that have been very keen, very, very keen to help, whether also with some of the food distribution for the very vulnerable. Very, very heartening, but not really the core business that we're used to.
Yeah, very much so.
Thank you very much, gents. Unless you have any other points on this particular question, we are going to run the next poll. We did ask all of our panelists for some statements about the current situation. So if we could have a look at the poll. We've got COVID-19 has given us an opportunity for positive change. So the options here are you can agree or disagree, or maybe you're not sure. That's also an option. So let's give this a little minute and then we can have a look at what the outcome is for this. I think you did already mention in your previous answer some of the nice things that we've seen, even if it isn't part of your core business. So let's see what the audience thinks. Ooh, okay, that's again very decisive, 64%. So yeah, let's have a look and see what more you have to say here.
To be honest, I think it has created an awful lot of positivity and opportunities to, where we can, at least quite be proactive in the changes that we've seen. So, for example, we heard on the national radio the other day that a quarter of workers are planning to work more from home. So there's a number of things there that we can try and do. Demand management is quite key, I think, as well, in how we actually lock in, or try at least to lock in the benefits we've seen, i.e. environmentally, but also from a well-being perspective as well, so encouraging more mobility around walking and cycling, especially given the UK guidance of, trying to stay away from public transport, which invariably means then people who push back into the car. So how can we manage that demand down? We've heard obviously earlier on about the various technological solutions that I think is certainly the way forward, where we want to go. Obviously, given the lack of funding that we've got now, that may take more years than opposed to months and a few years, let's say. But I think there's an awful lot of positivity for change, and hopefully all of our recovery plans out there are building upon that, and how we can actually try where we can to lock in these benefits as much as possible. So yeah, it's good to see people agree with it along those lines.
Yeah, I mean, so I think there has to be a positivity around this. COVID wasn't a choice. It's one of those things that you have to adapt to and live with. But those are the things that are the catalysts for change. And I think for a lot of things where we had knowledge about what were the problems, what we wanted to do, whether that is the work-life balance, people doing extreme commutes and having very little time for home life, or whether it's about their local town centres that they'd love to visit more, but they're working in the city centre. Those sorts of things may change, and I think that this is a real opportunity to grasp those. Cycling in my area of London has always been, there's too many cars, it's too hilly. There are lots of reasons why not. But if public transport isn't viable, if returning to the car isn't sustainable because of the sheer road space capacity, and we're getting a good shove from the national government in this direction, cycling is going to be the thing. And this is a time when it's quieter, when there is an involuntary event for us to then react with some experimentation. So we're going to be looking at large strategic cycle networks being painted onto the roads where formerly cars have been seen. And that's going to be interesting, exciting, and it's a one in a generation or hopefully even longer opportunity to do something quite different. Same with the interfaces with our town centres. We've got town centres where we've probably got conflicting thoughts around them. People are going to still be afraid of going out and being in their town centres, and yet these are the places that are most accessible to them right now, places that they can walk to, take part of their daily exercise, that have been supporting them whilst self-isolating at home. So how do we capture those town centres, make them more relevant, and particularly for somewhere like outer London where it's suburban, but also for plenty of towns around big cities where they're commuter towns and people have often been rather dismissive about these places. Actually, they're also home. They're home to a great many people. And I think as people work from home, are able to have more of a work-life balance, be around their families, that home is going to be important, and these towns will rise in prominence. And their innovation, their ability to sort of not just be a place with a few banks, a few shops and a few cafes, but also a little bit more of a cultural centre, a little bit more of a place to be, You know, those are some of the opportunities we're looking at. If we're freeing up some of the footway, taking out some of the parking initially to provide for social distancing, but after that, you know, when we potentially don't need to worry so much about being distant, do we want to return it to cars, or do we want a space where we can have an outdoor market? These are questions that we can be asking now and answering over the next months and couple of years maybe. Similarly, you know, we've got a lot of people become much more reliant on things being delivered to their home. But do we want to only deliver from a few large international corporations? Not necessarily. We've been looking at a local offer. You know, how do we stitch up some of our local businesses into a sort of green delivery system of cycles and electric vehicles, sort of taking some of the local provision around to the near areas. I think those are some great opportunities, and you wouldn't have thought, you know, each of these you could have pursued, you know, consecutively, but at the moment you have no choice but to follow them in parallel, and you could put together quite an exciting future with them.
I think in Bruges or in Belgium we already have a lot of cyclists, a lot of pedestrians, and we have a lot of people using the public transport. I think the main thing is to make sure that the people who were using the public transport won't restart using the car, because we can't handle all those cars in the city center, but also in the suburbs. We don't want them. But we don't have a lot of, I would say Bruges is a small town, it's a historical town. We don't have a lot of big lanes, a lot of big streets. So we have a lot of bike lanes. We have a lot of room for bikes and pedestrians already. So we don't have a lot of possibilities to change for more bike usage or for more pedestrian. The thing we need to get out of this situation is maybe the conflicts we have between cyclists and pedestrians, to give them bigger rooms, to give them more space, and maybe to try and get rid of the cars and a bit more streets in the city center, so that they each have their own room, the cyclists and the pedestrians. But that will be depending on how people will go to work. We were talking about more home working. A lot of companies allow that because they were obliged by the government, but they don't do it with the whole mind. So I'm not sure if the measures that we're taking now will be extended by some companies, and if the people have to come back to work, I fear that we'll take the car and they will get to places that we don't want them.
Thank you very much. We still have a couple of minutes on this question. And Phil, you made an interesting point that there will be some differences between people who are quite eager to get back to our normal life and other people who might be quite apprehensive about it. So for the latter group, how do you intend to, do you have some sort of plan for them and how to sort of reintegrate them back into normal living again?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it would be amiss of me not to mention my own mother, who has been a super self-isolator for no medical reason, but she does love a good bunker mentality. But they're very precautious. They are worried about, you know, what they might encounter out there. And actually, if you have been self-isolating and then digesting only the news and things that you've seen remotely, understanding that actually out there is still your community, it's still your town centres and those sorts of things will be important. I think part of what we're doing is we're obviously freeing up a lot of parking space, potentially other ways of making the public realm sufficiently roomy so that there can be both queuing for businesses and sufficient social distancing. I think those visual measures about making people feel secure in their town centres, I and not covering everything in red signs that say, you know, beware, beware, because it's not a war zone. We felt like we've just gone through a battle, but actually these are places that are going to be core to our economy moving forward. Yeah, I think it will be about taking sufficient measures to make it accessible. That accessibility is likely to be by foot and cycle more, so more provision for people to park their bikes. And yeah, just to make that streetscape welcoming.
Yep, great points. Thank you. So unless anybody has anything else to add here, Graham or Koen, we will move on to the next poll.
Okay.
So let's see what we have. So this poll is about managing people and intermediate measures. So we may have touched on some of these points already, such as the relaxing of enforcement. We know that that happened in Bruges. And yes, the last question, which is how will you manage the bounce back after lockdown? This one refers to things such as job losses and mental health for the population. So let's give it a few seconds and we'll see what our audience would like to be discussed next. Yep. So the options were, how have you communicated with your citizens? Have you made use of volunteers during this time? Did you temporarily relax enforcement? And how will you manage the bounce back after lockdown? So let's have a look at what the results are now. Okay, so we have 55%. So let's kick off with how will you manage the bounce back after lockdown? Feel free to start, anybody.
I think in Belgium it depends a lot of on the federal government. We have, I would say, we have an interesting political system in Belgium with a lot of ministers and a lot of parties involved, and it's the federal government who decides the pace of the lockdown, and it's the local communities that then have to abide by the rules, and then they have to make sure that everything that the federal government decides is able of we're able to do that. Like the 11th of May, the shops were allowed to reopen, but only depending on the social distancing rules, only letting in a couple of people at a time. Also, we have smaller streets and the waiting lines in the shops in front of the shops had to be according to social distancing rules as well. But if you have shops with a width of about 5 meters or 10 meters, you're not able to put a lot of people on the curbs. So we did would say the parking spaces, we use them as a waiting space for the people. I would say the effect on mental health and job losses is we try to encourage people to shop, but we don't want them to shop too much at the moment, because it's a difficult thing. You don't want people to go to a certain place together all at the same time, because then you have issues again with the social distancing. But if you don't do it, you risk of shops going out of business. The next thing that we're gonna or should reopen are the bars and restaurants. They've been closed for, I think, more than 2 months and a half now. That's also an issue that we have to see that if that's viable, how we will do it, and how we will do it on the streets as well, because the terraces, they need social distancing rules as well. Can we enlarge the terraces? How many people will we let inside? So those are all the things we have to decide, and the problem is it's not a big master plan, or it's not possible, because every pub, every restaurant, every bar, every shop is different. Every environment is different. They have wider streets, you have a really narrow streets, you have a lot of space, you don't have a lot of space. So it's almost, I wouldn't say impossible, but it's really tricky to find a solution for every bar, for every restaurant, for every shop that works.
So I mean, some of the things that we're looking at are more around the practical side of things. We've got to assume that everybody potentially is in a more precarious financial situation. So some of the things that we've done around the parking elements are we normally sell annual passes to businesses and residents for their parking. We've now moved down to monthly and quarterly, as well as increments that people can buy at no additional cost for doing that. So just on a pro rata basis. That's just to help people cope with that. And if people are in a really exceptional situation, they get in touch with us. We will make special arrangements. For us, this is about supporting our residents and our businesses through this very acute period where their finances may be most difficult, because we want to keep as many of those, particularly businesses, the viable businesses, going for the future. They're going to be the foundations of us of having a future vibrant economy. So that's really keen for us. And we think it's a long-term investment in the council's finances, as well as the vitality of the area. And similarly to Graham mentioning much earlier, we've taken steps around debt, around helping people support like that. I think how do we help people on things like job losses? I think moving forward, we're looking at wider offers around, for example, business permits and the cost of waste services and various other council services that you can package together as a sort of offer to new businesses or to help sustain businesses. We'll have to have some creative thinking about how we join up our council services. I think a lot of places are quite laissez-faire insofar as business support goes, or interventions in places like the High Street. But if we do see a lot of business closures, shop closures, it's probably going to be local authorities that are the first to look at, do we buy some of these businesses, turn them over to temporary other uses? If we've seen a third of our high street go and it's never going to come back, do we consolidate, long linear high streets down into more compact and sustainable areas? So there's going to be a lot of questions. As suggested, it is going to be a local answer, but I think it will be more interventionist than it has been in the past.
Yeah, I think a very similar period in York, and probably across the board as well, really, to a great extent, is that very much guided by what central government dictates. So, for example, on the 1st of June, open markets and car showrooms can open up, following quite stringent guidance from the government. And then on the 15th of June, where retailers themselves will be able to open up, not restaurants, not bars, unfortunately for many. But again, there'll be detailed guidance coming from that one. So based on that guidance that comes out from central government, local authorities then, I think in turn, certainly what York will be doing is base our recovery plan around the economics and also the well-being of people, and then in turn how transport as an overall subject area can then influence and help influence that. So walking, cycling has evidence-based benefits on people's mental health and obviously physical well-being. So we're trying to lock in those benefits with the various immediate infrastructure things we're looking at, such as pop-up cycle lanes, which is a term that's popped up now, better route planning, how we can actually prioritise public transport usage for those that have got no other choices. So whether you live out of town, you don't have a car, you're disabled, you're elderly, etc. Those kind of broad typical caveats about how we can actually get them to public transport. And then the same point, managing from a parking perspective, how do we manage the flow of vehicles coming in? So for example, I'm very keen to see measures to reduce the demand on peak car parking. So for commuters, just simply picking up the keys because it's easier and then driving city centre. So through a combination of increased charging for on-peak, having a significant reduction in car park charging for off-peak, let's say 3 hours free parking, something that politicians seem quite keen on. And then those consultations then take further forward in our BID, our business improvement district we have here in York, about what they feel in this very much changing world that we're in now, around what local business models and the larger scale business models are adapting to try and do, and then how then parking, transport, and the economic drive for the local authority can do to take that step further forward. Also got things like payment holidays coming in, whether it's free parking permits or PCNs, maybe where we're taking a higher degree of leniency and just cancel those, as the case may be. Council tax holidays to a fair extent, and obviously business rates as well, how we go to take that forward. So very much supporting, listening, and to an extent a reactive role, I think, as far as York's concerned, about how we can actually help deal with those specific points around mental health and job losses, etc. Gosh, where do we go with that? It's as broad as you like, isn't it? But it's just trying to, I think, look importantly about the projects we have ongoing, I think, across the board, where technology will become one of the main beneficiary guidance, I think, around how we can actually get more people to the parking spaces through self-service systems, new back office system, whatever it may be. Contactless is obviously very key now. All our payment machines are not contactless by a long shot. You still have to press a button, even use contactless cards. So what else can we do? So look at mobile phone payment solutions, new pay and exit systems that have this. Indeed, what we've heard on as well about smart city approaches, and how the transport world, parking world as well, can better integrate within that. I think very importantly as well, listening to what everyone is saying out there. So in the UK, we've had a national parking survey gone out, which has given us an awful lot of information about where parking services need to be in the future, and both as we come out of lockdown, developing more of a light touch approach to parking enforcement, let's say, to be mindful that people maybe can't pay the bills on time. So developing policy that has a much broader timescale for people to essentially sort themselves out, as they come out of lockdown in whatever phase approach may be the case. The UK government has 5 levels of alert. We're now level 4, level 5 being the top one, level 1 being normal. So we're just basing our recovery policies around that stage, where hopefully now going to level 3, where an element of normality can begin to come back up again.
Great, thank you very much, gentlemen. Does anybody have any other point on this question? I know it's very broad, as you pointed out, Graham, and of course it is pretty open to interpretation, and everybody's in the same situation where we're all not sure really of how things are going to go, as everything's changing day by day. So if there are any other points, we'd love to hear them. Otherwise, we will move on to our next poll and see what our audience would like us to discuss next. So let's have a look at that. Okay, so here we go. The next poll actually is a statement, and we have, it will be difficult to balance safety and the requirement of bringing in a valuable source of revenue. So the options are: I agree, I disagree, or I'm not sure. So we'll give it a few seconds and we will see what our audience thinks. I have a feeling that I might know what the answer to this one will be, as I'm sure all of you do have an idea as well. So let's go to the results of the poll. And we have 57% of our audience agree that it will be difficult to balance safety and bringing in a valuable source of revenue. So who would like to kick off with this one?
Precisely like with, I guess, as our recovery plan goes, it's concerned. One of the reasons, like Phil was saying before, why we pulled our enforcement back was obviously the safety risks to the staff, basically, and having to focus all council resources on key essential workers like waste and social services, for example, and how services can better support schools as well. So that allowed that freeing up of resource and focus for management, senior management, to focus on the key staff at the time, and same point protect other staff as when needed. And as Phil rightfully did, so there, a lot of the guys went out into the communities to help with volunteer hubs and social distancing, that kind of thing as well. So I think that's been very key. Like anything, it is difficult, but then there is the guidance out there, and seemingly the constant changing guidance as well. So anything has to have a risk-based approach to it. What kind of level of PPE, if anything, do you need to have? Social distancing is obviously here with us to stay for the foreseeable future. So when our enforcement team looks at resuming some more normal patrols, it'll be told to avoid areas of where there are people congregating, for example, or if there is an element of confrontation in there, which unfortunately we've seen prior to lockdown, and if it's come out, we won't see as much of that. Having new technologies in place around CCTV, body-worn cameras, and just basically saying that a PCN is a PCN. It's not worth someone getting abused over or being put at risk. As we approach this kind of level 3 of lockdown, let's say, and the COVID infection rate, that will then dictate furthermore about how we can go about doing that. But essentially, as far as parking is concerned, there's 3 elements of revenue: permits, penalty charge notice, revenue, and of course the car park revenue. The car park one being, I think, certainly for York, one of the biggest ones going, followed by permit, then PCNs. So it's how we can begin to focus our services to encourage the take-up of car park revenue again, while balancing out the sustainable choices that we are being told, and rightfully been told, to make, and then simply balancing staff safety from there as well, along with customers' demand, because a lot of people now have kind of get a bit tired of someone else parking in their street as with their residence parking permits in there. So the level of leniency and cooperation that we've got, I think, is slowly beginning to wane a bit now, and that's why we need to look at that in a bit more detail about how we can go about doing that, but very much in a coordinated approach across the rest of the council services, where we can across the political spectrum as well to dictate that. So it is difficult, it is a balance, but it's not insurmountable by any means.
My view is that we are, by virtue of the role of parking management, you are managing people's behaviours, and you're managing their desire to do stuff, and you're managing in many cases the tendency for people to be sort of a little bit self-destructive insofar as, well, I'll park here, and then they'll complain 10 minutes down the road, well, why is that person parked there and I'm in a traffic jam? That's kind of, managing people's behaviours is core to what we do. And I think as we come out of recovery, a lot of what we will be doing actually is about again, managing behaviours of people, pent-up demand, wishing to go out and do that. So I think a lot of what we were doing in the past will still be relevant. A lot of the income sources that may come from the enforcement side particularly will still be there. But it's about charges that we apply to people. Do we still want to apply them for the traffic management effects? Do we want to not apply them so as to support businesses? Or is that going to encourage a level of car use that's unsustainable? Do we want to increase them so as to encourage more cycle use? So, you could argue the same thing in various different ways. And I think different budgets will see, changes. As far as balancing safety, I think we are there for the safety management. I think we'll have to hand over some of the parking space that may generate revenue over to safer pavements. I think that's our duty in the public realm particularly. I don't think that's an area to have a great deal of debate over. But what we do after they've been used for safety only purposes, whether we keep them for public spaces or whether we encourage more cycling and walking and still want to be less encouraging of the car, that'll depend on what the national flavour is as well. But I think that the reality is that if we don't do anything, or if we say we're going to stay out of this for a little longer, or if we're too concerned for our workforce to the extent that we don't restore enforcement services in full, we will find that the general public will start to do their own thing in the absence of that. And if we leave a vacuum, you know, that's potentially the greatest, most unsafe situation to have. I mean, yesterday was a sunny public holiday in the UK, and certainly in parts of London, I was struggling to see the difference between how this was prior to COVID. Heartening in many ways, and I had a very nice sausage roll as a result. But I think it means that, you know, the reality is that if there isn't direction and leadership coming from the authorities, then, you know, it could see us lose all the gains. You know, the whole point of the lockdown was to be able to get to a point where we can get back to normality in a safe way. One of the greatest risks is that uncoordinated return to activity will be dangerous to the public.
Mhm.
I think I would say most people don't believe it when I say it, but the revenue of parking isn't our main goal. Of course, we get a lot of revenue. We get around 4 million euros parking in parking revenue. That's only on-street parking. Then we still got 1.9 something like that from tickets, and we got I think 2 or 3 million from underground parking. So we get a lot of revenue for that. But the main thing, especially for the on-street parking and the ticketing, is that we want to have extra room for our citizens to park. And people who don't have to take the car into the city center, we don't want into the city center by car, and we want them in the underground parking spaces. And maybe that will be an extra stimuli, that spaces that we give now temporarily for more space for waiting lines, for example, we can keep those as non-parking spots, and we can improve the public realm a bit, add benches, add trees, add stuff like that, or just more space for pedestrians to walk in. The main thing for us will be the acceptance of people of using parking meters. We have the possibility to pay by phone. The people that use the pay by phone option is around 25% of the people. During the lockdown, the few people who paid, because we saw most people didn't pay anymore because they knew there weren't any enforcements anymore. From the people who did pay, it was almost or a bit more than 50% used pay by phone, and they didn't use the parking meters anymore. So I think the safety aspect will be mostly for the drivers who are not willing anymore to use a parking meter, because I think it's dangerous to use one because of the disease.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Some really interesting points there, especially about human behavior and managing that. And of course, for all of you, I think that is something that you all have to take into consideration alongside the parking issues, which is perhaps something that other people don't have to so much. So let's move on to our next poll. I think we have a set of 4 questions here. They are all related to recovery strategy and future planning. So the first question is, have you started to look at a recovery strategy? What are you prioritizing at the moment? How are you managing the increase in demand for parking? And do you have a contingency plan in the event of lockdown being reinforced? This one could really go either way. Well, let's see what the audience thinks. Has anyone from our panel got any guesses as to what our audience may want us to answer here?
No.
No.
Yeah, I'll come back to you.
I think we've got the first one already, haven't we, really?
That's slightly cheating, but that's okay. Right, let's have a look at the results. So we have 44% have you started to look at a recovery strategy. So perhaps you could tell us a little bit about that. Are there any thinkers for this?
I'll kick in first, shall I? So yeah, I think we've all mentioned we've all been looking at this to an extent. York has only just started. I'll say York rather than me, but York has only just started looking at its transport recovery over the last couple of weeks or so. That may be a commonality we see across the local authorities across the world. Not sure. I've been looking at it for a little bit longer than that, basically. Partly because I've got civil enforcement officers that couldn't go out and help in the communities, kind of sitting twiddling the thumbs, and there's a day job kind of not really reducing much as I thought it would do. It's given me a little bit of time as well just to kind of plan these things in ahead. So saying before, what York have done, what I've done is looking at the central government criteria around the different of alert levels, and then when we reach one of those nationally, and whatever guidance comes out from central government, that then dictates right when we go into a level 3, let's say, for example, which I get the feeling we're going into now, for example. So it looks at the combination of key worker reduction, so reduction of, let's say, banking staff now no longer being key workers to just being health workers, and maybe some core council services as well as other health workers, for example. How best we can look at the parking estate that we have both on and off street, allowing deliveries to come back in again, and preparing for the local economic boom we hope to start off again by the 15th of June, as we've seen. And then say really just to manage the demand of parking, so we have more of a balanced approach. Again, as I said before, we want to try and really lock in the environmental benefits of sustainable transport that we've seen. A lot more people are finding out about what cycling's about, what walking's about, and discovering new things that haven't really discovered before until they approach lockdown. So trying to lock those benefits in and trying to reduce the number of people commuting in by private car, such as through pricing and that kind of stuff, and with the promotion of better simple infrastructure in place, along with also based on the business side of things, to encourage more people into the city centre as quickly as possible during the off-peak side of things. So really, it's something we've been looking at in the whole, but really much based on an economic driver and a societal change driver as well. We want to try and take that forward. I'll stop there for now.
Yep. So we set up a recovery planning team within the parking service in about mid-April, and we've kind of since then created all the governance around that, and we're running it as a program. And we're using this as the vehicle for delivery of some of the programs and projects that we had going into the COVID-19 lockdown. And the intention is initially to work on the restoration of parking services, which is obviously to be in line with and was triggered by government announcements, and is very much about enabling people to get permits, supporting our key workers, supporting those who are helping others, and fairness as well around sort of making things avoidable, and really trying to avoid people getting penalty charge notices, because we don't have to worry about the consequential effects of that around debt and mental health if we haven't issued them where we can help people avoid that. So really strongly in that area. The next things are going to be around capturing the benefits. So a lot of the public realms worked, as well as the walking and cycling initiatives, and really the shift around of people sort of working more at home. Medium term things that we're looking at are, does this change how our CPZs are going to look? Controlled parking zones. Are the hours of operation going to be suitable? We're thinking that some businesses may start to want to expand their operating hours just so that they can have more people come through with less concentration. So do we need to reflect that with some of our on-street controls? And it's also the council is more widely looking at how does it operate. So it's had virtual committees, so that it can have still the public scrutiny of its decision-making functions. And gosh, we've made a lot of decisions recently, and we've made sure that we've pushed those out into the public so that they can be seen, but so that people can still have that interaction on a democratic level. And certainly looking about, in the future, will we have a more blended approach where people don't have to come to town hall to see the committees, but can actually interact virtually or come to town hall as fits them. Similarly, we're looking at our estate of buildings. If we've got a lot more people working from home, then we need to have offices of the size that you have. So all these things are kind of going to be on the table about the service reorganisation. And I think that parking services will be really important for that, but certainly probably not in a unique position with some of these areas.
I think we learned already quite a lot with the reopening of the stores and some shops as well. The first thing we learned, it's really difficult to know what will happen. For example, if there's a well-known fast food restaurant that reopened at one day, and there were waiting lines in the drive-in for more than an hour and a half. When the shops opened in the city center, there were almost no shoppers. So it's really difficult to foresee what will happen when it opens. And we are now, not me, but other people in the city of Brugge, of course, are working really hard on a relance plan that they want to instead to help the businesses, the shops, but also the bars and cafes who are going through really rough times, to help them to get over it. But it's really difficult because on the one hand you want to do really good for the businesses, but on the other hand you have to make sure that the citizens aren't affected, or the local citizens aren't affected. Also, if you want, a lot of shops ask for free parking, but we don't want a lot of people at the same time coming to the same shops. So free parking, on the other hand, is not something we're willing to oblige. It's also difficult because Bruges is a really touristy city. Last year we have 8.5 million tourists, and if I would say if the tourists don't come back, a lot of the relance plan won't work, because we need them, or a lot of the shops, a lot of the stores need them to be commercially. They need them to be viable. We people from Bruges, we don't buy statues of the Belfry, stuff like that. Those are the touristy stuff. We don't buy as much chocolate as you think we buy. Beer we do buy a lot. So it's also depending on how tourism will restart after the lockdown, and if people will be able to travel through different countries again.
I mean, I'm personally looking forward to going back to Bruges at some point. So there's one tourist here. I think part of also what will be really key as far as recovery goes is making sure that we're giving excellent guidance to businesses, and making clear also to the general public that we've done that. And so, if we are, our public realm is the area within our control, but it's an interface with shops, businesses, and residents. And if we make sure that we've got good guidance going to shops, potentially in the long term, we could give awards of excellence for those shops that are have most implemented the required measures to keep people safe. Once we can say these things are in place, and we say clearly to our residents, we've done this, hopefully you won't get a situation like you've had where you reopen the city centre but nobody comes.
Let's say they don't allow fun shopping, only run shopping, we call it. So only you need the basic things. So we don't want people coming and trying different clothes to buy. So we try to manage the amount of people coming to the shops, but it's difficult for the shops to open with a lot of staff, and if only 2 or 3 people are coming to the shops.
Yeah, very much. I mean, it's time, I think, is certainly a function, and I think it's quite good actually that people have asked this question now, actually, because it shows they are at least thinking about it, and hopefully everyone watching this, you know, it has started to think about it and a bit more, because I think I'm certainly finding that this time is going very, very quickly. I mean, the weeks almost just seem to blur into days almost, because it goes that quickly. So if not already, do start now on your recovery strategy. If you're in a local authority side of things, public sector, you do have, unfortunately, quite a long time to get that political steer and buy-in as well, because politics does play a very big hand in this. And I think for me, I do try and have a listening agenda with the local retailer side through the business room districts that we have as well. So if not already, do start now, I think, to really develop your recovery strategy. And then the important thing that Phil and others have saying before, make sure that is hand in hand with other departments within the local authority, so we're all speaking as one. Essentially, so that is quite important. So yeah, do start now already.
Great, thank you very much, and certainly a valid point, Graham, in that you can never start early enough with the recovery strategy. Right, I think we have one more poll here, and it is a statement, so let's move on to that. So we have, some of the mandatory government guidelines are impossible to implement in practice. Controversial, perhaps. And any guesses from our panelists as to what do you think the results of this poll might be?
I think for a teacher it might be maybe more the middle one, I guess, but yeah, I think we'll be able to implement it.
It is bouncing up and down a little bit here, more than I would expect.
If the question was,
sorry.
If the question was, are impossible to read within sufficient time before they brought out the next set of guidelines, that would have been a lot more clear cut, I suspect.
Yeah, I think you're right.
We're still bouncing around a little bit, so we'll give it a couple more seconds and see what happens here.
That's good.
All right, so let's go to the results and see what our audience thinks. Right, well, 44% agree that some of the mandatory guidelines are impossible to implement. So, gentlemen, feel free to kick off with this point.
Yeah, as far as it's not level really to a extent. If I may, just from my perspective, when these central government guidelines do come out, and this is probably across the world as well, is there's always a slight caveat, whether that's said or maybe more unspoken, that there is some flexibility within that, even though they try not to say that one. So while it's very good for a national policy to be created, national policy cannot fit in directly into the local issues that we have, and that's in the same why all of us across the world have a localized or regionalized government to interpret what that means for them. And then, of course, there's various political lobbying and debates going on from there. So it is hard if you take it on the face value, but given what I think we're all used to doing is taking what the spirit of that guidance is, and then interpret that down into actually what does York, or what does Bruges, or what does Milwaukee, or what does London or parts of London need, based on what we've got, and listening to our customers, businesses and residents, for example, and there we can interpret those guidelines very much so and implement them accordingly. For me, I don't think it is impossible, but some of it is very hard to do, and there has to be a high degree of interpretation, I think, in that.
My suspicion is that for a lot of the guidance, it's intended to be, sort of a little bit stretching, so as to acknowledge the fact that people, they'll be told 2 meters and they'll do something kind of like 2 meters, and then when the queue's a bit big, or it's they want to get out of the wind, that's shuffled down to 1.5 meters. And potentially that might be a reflection of the mentality of the British public, and you compare that to potentially Germany, where a clear 1.5 meters would be much more followed. So it's probably a case of there's sort of some psychology built into that. I think it's also a case of getting some guidance out, and having some of that implemented is better than not having sufficient guidance at all, and to give enough time for local authorities and then cascading down to businesses and residents to sort of have that communicated to them. So I suspect there is guidance out there that was intended to just be out there for the sake of use, rather than it being one that you could really drill into scientifically and say that this absolutely is the best way to do it. And I certainly think that, you know, for some of these things, there's a sort of suck it and see type approach. I think, however, there are also elements of this that are based on aspirations. So certainly the sort of big push towards cycling, and you know, Boris Johnson has obviously a history with cycling in London, has obviously had a major health scare recently. You can see how potentially those things come together in his opinion to be something where you're looking at this going, actually, this is an opportunity for better public health, for people to be doing things like that. So kind of nudge to the nation, and I imagine that there will be a few things like that which are not necessarily science-led, not necessarily pure fact matters, but where guidance is there to kind of influence directions for our future. Because as we said much earlier, this could be, you know, quite a generation-changing thing.
I think it depends also on the guidelines. Like they say, some of the mandatory government guidelines are impossible, and I believe that's true, because we have some guidelines that are next to impossible to imply in some streets or in some shops in Bruges, for example. But the other ones are really possible to do, and I think we're more inclined to the British way of doing things instead of the German way. If there are some rules, we tend to find a loophole, and we don't want to listen to the rules. But the problem is also, the longer the lockdown lasts, the more, I wouldn't call it civil revolts, but people, they don't tend to listen anymore to the government. And especially if some higher people or high-profile people are caught not abiding the rules themselves, it's difficult to explain to people why they're not allowed to do something.
Perfect. Well, I'm not quite sure if there's much more to say on this on this particular
Probably
question.
not, no.
So if you're happy, we can move on now to our open floor, because we've had some questions come in already from the audience. So let's go and see what we have here. So, right, well, let's kick off with, does COVID-19 provide an opportunity for authorities to push forward faster with their sustainable mobility plans? And if so, how?
I would say in Belgium, yes and no. Because in Bruges, for example, we have already 30 to 40% of traffic to schools or to work environments by bike, and we have a lot of people on public transport as well. And I think it will be a good thing for more people to get on the bikes. But it will be really difficult for people after this situation is over to get them back on the public transport. So it's a good thing to let people bike or walk more, but it's going to be difficult to get the public transport back on track.
All right, I'm just going to briefly interrupt here, and there is an audience in this room, and you all have the chance to ask your burning questions to Koen or Graham or Philip, and they are all here to answer these questions. So make use of this opportunity. Let's see. There are a couple of questions that already rolled in during the discussion. What's your likely focus post-COVID, and what do you think will be the primary changes to council parking in the future?
From York's perspective, we're one of the few that are thankfully given a few £1 million from the government for a smart city approach, actually. So we're developing that slowly but surely. My service has now moved into a wider team that is looking at that. So going forward, it's the integration of our existing services and how we can bring them more into the 21st century, basically. So it's more details of like pay and exit systems, for example, developing more contactless ways of parking, whether it's online accounts, ticketless, barrierless, ideally, parking that we've got. So I think for us, given that everything contactless is such a thing now, really, that helps to be a motivator to drive forward technology. But I think it's going from actually saying it's kind of a yes and a no to an extent as well, because we've lost £100,000 a month, so it's what almost £2 million we've lost, as far as York's concerned, for a small unitary authority of 202,000 people. That's quite a lot of money. So that's what I said before, that to develop anything now that would made within the next few months or next few years, it's going to take much longer to do. Thankfully, we have some of that money from central government from previous grants that's helped an awful lot. But yeah, it's going to be a tricky one. But I think the political appetite is there, and that's the key thing to drive it further forward.
Yeah, I would echo that, but I would also say that a lot of parking services have ended up where they are because they started to make money, and then they made some more money, and then politicians go, gosh, parking services make money. How do you make more money? And it's I think the sort of delinkage between managing the traffic and the world in which that operates, the high streets, the public realm, and all those sorts of things, and whether parking services have been sufficiently well integrated into the health and well-being of authorities, to the business elements of authorities, and the sort of town centres and regeneration and those sorts of things. Part of what we're seeing as the recovery is looking at these things much more holistically, not necessarily assuming that the parking revenue is going to go on indefinitely. And I think we all knew that was going to come at some point, with greater levels of automation and such like in the future. So actually, now looking at where does parking sit as part of the sort of wider piece of town centre vitality. So losing some of probably our best earning parking spaces, but in doing so gaining town centres that have got a long-term future, I think is going to be kind of a key thing for us, and to sort of be less silo orientated and much broader in the way that we think about the goods of that. And this year we've probably all been allowed to look away from our bottom line because the bottom line is far too scary. Actually, if we can get some learnings from that and think about what is the wider benefit of this and what are we here for, that can be quite transformational about the way we approach things.
All right. Yeah. What keeps coming up? You can read everywhere. The statement always is now that people will choose personal transport over public transport. Does that mean most municipalities or cities need to plan for more parking spaces? How will that be managed?
I don't think that that's possible because the parking space is the end point of a journey that requires a road space. And very few of us live in cities where we've got excess road space capacity, where we've got the potential to put that in a way that's acceptable to the environment, to the built environment, or to the general public. So, the answer is that the car isn't going to be the solution, and it hasn't been the solution to date in reality. So there has to be a blend of things, hopefully a restoration of confidence in some public transport, cycling, different ways of planning your journeys, fewer journeys potentially, and journeys that are shorter that can be accomplished by foot or cycle. But I can't see that we could be trying to find more parking spaces. I think we may be looking at building more cycling facilities, cycle car parks, those sorts of things are much more likely.
Yeah, I was going to say, I totally agree, basically. And we're looking at across the board now at taking out 2 lanes down to 1 traffic lane, for example, so we can get more the cycling infrastructure, indeed walking infrastructure in as well. So more car-free city centres, town centres, for example, in there. Again, mentioned before about these pop-up cycle lanes, which is the Boris Johnson term that's come around. So it is around looking at the increase in capacity and infrastructure, and the softer measures, the behavioural change methods to encourage people for the, let's say, 5 miles and less journey to be done by bike or by walking. As rightfully said as well, that more people seemingly are choosing to work from home. The technology is there now; it's getting better, as we're seeing here today. We're speaking around the world with this, and touch wood, so far no glitches. So there's a higher degrees of confidence now in technology, and people not really needing to travel as much. So that's something that we're basing our side of things on. As Koen in Brussels, for example, they've got very high cycling levels. There's probably always more you can do, but from a traffic perspective, it is trying to get that traffic down even further. That's one of the key benefits from to try and do to look in.
Yeah, that also matches we get a lot of questions in, but one statement, which is the parking assets with enough capacity outside the city centre are the solutions. If you combine it with people, using their bikes, or I think that might be one of these solutions.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's obviously a connection between retail and parking, and the question here is, what is your authority doing to protect vulnerable shops and other workers returning back to their place of work, and they may need parking, and yeah, the same question goes for vulnerable shoppers. Is that something that you guys are thinking about?
Mm-hmm.
I'm not a big fan of the statement that there is a big connection between retail and parking.
Okay.
Of course, the customers and also a lot of the people who work there needs is they need to come by car, but they don't always need to come by car, and that's one of the things we want to try to do is people who don't need their car to come to the shop or come to come to work, they don't use the car. That's one of the things we want to get in Bruges, because say retail owners or shop owners or business owners always think that a lot of or almost all their customers come by car, but there's enough research that disproves that theory. Of course, the people come by car, but also a lot of people are cyclists or local people go by foot, and we want to enhance that part of the customers. The thing is, if I would say parking or the lack of parking space or the price of the parking tariffs are sometimes used as a scapegoat by owners of shops, as I would say used as a scapegoat as the reason why they don't sell as much as they think they should sell. But I think it's a different thing. Parking is part of it, but most of the thing it's also depending on what they sell. It's also the atmosphere that's in the main street, the atmosphere that's in the shop, that is also really important for a shop owner. So we don't want to limit the discussion to parking and retail, because parking is a part of the solution or is part of the problem as well, but it's not the main issue why shop owners don't sell as much as they think they should.
Right. Yeah, the question was more specifically about vulnerable workers and shoppers, but I do get your point, and I think that's the best way to do it. But this is specifically about vulnerable workers and shoppers. Any thoughts on this?
Well, I think we've got already blue badge schemes for those who have mobility problems. I think coming out of this, we've obviously had some people who've had to self-isolate due to underlying health conditions that are mean that they've really needed to limit their contact. Now that was key when the rate of transmission is very high, but that doesn't necessarily change when there is still a risk to them. Now you can't eliminate all risk, and there's never been a risk-free world. We'll never get to that. But I think there is potential that you may well find that you could work with. So, for example, at the moment, people are having medicines delivered to them. In the future, will that continue? Or will it be the case that people need to collect their medicines? And in that case, will there be some pharmacies that allocated almost kind of a drive-through function? So it might be that we allocate a reserved parking space outside some of these pharmacies, or we look to have additional blue badge parking, which may be temporary or it may be permanent, which prioritizes that bit of parking for those people. Similarly, you might want to do that sort of for various other things for collections. I don't think you're ever going to make shops safer for the most at-risk people and their need to isolate themselves a little bit more than the rest of us have is going to be maintained. I think for them, delivery will be key, and about making sure that the deliveries are possible for them. But it might be that in certain locations there are special days for the very vulnerable, for those kind of stop and drop off or pick up type activities.
Yeah, so I mean, partly for us, it's about a listening agenda as well. So hearing what again our business proven district, for example, are saying. So and the various retail forums that's out there. I think what I'm seeing on this side of the UK is that a lot of people are still scratching their heads about how they're going to survive it more, how we're going to bring more people in city centre. And for town city centre, it's not just a shopping experience; it's the whole cultural experience. So what are the key attractors coming in there? One of those is your beers and your restaurants and all that kind of stuff that's in there. And to an extent, those are vulnerable workers. Let's say, for example, that will be a part of the risk assessments for each business to do. If they feel that they need free parking for their staff, then that's something that politicians may agree to. It'll be a very short-term thing, but it's coming right. You're saying there is so much evidence out there to show that parking versus retail, one doesn't support the other to a fair extent. Technologies like pay and exit, yes, that certainly does to an extent, but part of it is listening agenda. And for those that are truly vulnerable, as in they have the representative disabled blue badge, then they can park for free in the car parks and on street for the 3 hours and all that kind of stuff that they need to park for. But I think a lot of that will be back to what they used to be doing. And if the bus operators, for example, and local authorities can look at being proactive about managing the demand for public transport, then that is something we can do. So, for those that are vulnerable, cue social distancing, obviously, but anyone else just wants to jump on the bus, well, no, sorry, you can't do that because you don't fit X, Y, and Z category. So it's still quite early days yet. Going back to one of the last questions we have in here, but have we started to look at recovery strategies yet? Some people are starting to look at that. Some people maybe a bit further on with it. But at the moment, I think it's just maintaining that kind of listening kind of agenda, I guess, let's say, but at the same point directing that about what our aims are around sustainability, around economic development, and do what we can.
So it's obvious that some things need to change, and there's one I think interesting question. Given the loss of revenue from the past period and this period, will it have an impact on any financial investment in technology that you were looking at prior to COVID? Because I think that might change a little bit, but it's an investment that has to happen at some point. But what do you guys think about this?
Certainly for us, yes, we will do. I mean, I mentioned before that we're quite lucky. We've got some grants that's helped, and I've gone back to my members on Friday, actually just reconfirm that the money I've got for a new back office parking system, which has put everything online, create a self-service mentality, and pay and exit strategy as well. Is that money still there? Is that money still secure? Yes, it is. But for anything new that we want to take forward, I think all local authorities have had to look at what existing projects they've got in place. If that money has been funded locally or been taken from grants, if the latter, then it's probably safe to bet that still can carry on. But generally speaking, I think it does affect any projects we want to see in the near future. That's why I said before, I think rather than months to a few years, we're probably looking at years now, I think, to take forward any kind of new or even to any kind of existing technological smart city approach changes that maybe we want to do.
I'm hopeful of being able to hold a contrary view to that, Graham, and I'm hopeful that this is going to come from the national government, insofar as there is going to be a desire to have an economic stimulus. I think there's going to be a need to have an economic stimulus. I think that the public sector will be at the forefront of that, working as the sort of conduit through which government debt-funded monies are spent through into the private sector. I think we need to have quite a few shovel-ready sort of ideas that will accelerate that, and as part of our recovery planning, the CPZ plans that we thought might have taken 5 to 10 years, we're saying, actually, are we going to accelerate these? Are we going to bring them forward faster? Some of the things that will be growth enabling within the borough, again, with regards to the highways, changes to road layout, bus prioritisation, and those sorts of things. We're looking at actually which of those plans can we get forward so that we can start to be doing things. And I think there will be a feeling that we need to be doing things. Now, if government starts to set that as the agenda, government starts to need to look at providing some of those monies. So we may not get all of the things that we were hoping for, and we may have to change what we hope for, and we may be the disappointed child at Christmas occasionally. But I think if we don't have those ideas, if everybody here isn't ready to say, actually, if we were being bold, this is what we could do, there'll probably be funding out there that gets missed and opportunities that aren't, taken.
Thanks so much.